Have you ever lost $1.2 million? I did. And here's what I learned. Stay tuned. I'll show you exactly what happened, what I did wrong, what I ended up finally doing right, and how I got out of that mess. Welcome to the YouTube channel. I'm hoping you're having a very blessed day. As blessed as I'm having today, and hopefully your life is filled with a lot of abundance today. Anyways, with that being said, all right, so here's what ended up happening. So let me give you a true life situation on one of the companies that I own and what happened and how I got myself in some massive, massive hot water. So I'll take you back a little bit to the beginning. Follow me here because I got to set the stage for how this $1.2 million loss came to be and why I ended up there, okay? And all the lessons that I learned along the way and what I do differently now in order to make sure that I do not get myself in those situations, because I'll be honest with you, getting yourself out of a $1.2 million loss was a bit difficult, and it set me back about 4 or 5 years. So I'm hoping that I can save you from this 4 or 5 year pain that I had to crawl out of for this particular company. So let me paint the picture. So I opened up my first company almost 20 years ago. I came from automotive, and I decided that, you know what, I'm going to open up this marketing company because I know a lot about dealers and I know a lot about marketing, and I'm gonna do this thing because I've always been super creative when it comes to ad copy and verbiage on ad copy and so forth and so on. And so anyway, so I opened up this ad company 20 years ago. So I ended up bringing somebody with me that was very close to me, that had really been almost like almost like a mentor to me. Ended up bringing her along and said, hey, we're going to do this thing. We're going to do it on our own. And this is what we're going to do. Anyways, in the process of all of that, we kind of formed I guess you would call it a partnership of some sort, right? Within the process of forming that, I knew, right? And I said, hey, we need to have some sort of contract or agreement, because at the time when I made this happen, the money that was going to be used to open up this company was coming from my pocket, right? So in other words, there was no money coming from the other party. All the money was coming from my end, from my pocket, and from what I had saved up. So in other words, the risk of the money, if this didn't work, was solely my responsibility and was on my shoulders. So I was bringing in the money. She was merely bringing in, obviously, the time, right? That's the resource that she had to give, was the time. But again, at the time, I had already left automotive, so I had all the time in the world. So it wasn't like she was the time resource and I had no time resource and I was just putting in the money. It wasn't like that. I put in the money and I put in the time because I was working in the business full time, right? So when I made the transition out of being an employee to being a owner or an entrepreneur, I guess I should say, I made it 100% dedicated, quit my job, jumped in, the end, right? Like, that is how I do things. I don't advise you to do that. I would certainly do that a little bit differently. And if you want me to kind of make a video about what I would do today differently from what I've learned the last 20 years in business, of how I would go from a W-2 job to a entrepreneur type side gig, or becoming an entrepreneur and making enough money to be able to leave my job, I'll be happy to make that video, because I can tell you right now exactly how I would structure that. But anyways, so she came along and she was offering her time as a resource. However, I had time as a resource and I brought in my money. So brought her into the business, told myself, hey, we should have some sort of agreement. Things are exciting in the beginning, right? Everyone's excited. We're doing something new, and, we're going to be entrepreneurs, and, we're going to do our own thing, and, we work for ourselves, and that's kind of the way it went, right? So, one thing led to the other. And at the end of the day, guess what? I knew that I needed to have some sort of agreement. I knew that I should have an operating agreement. I knew that I should have stuff written down on paper. I knew that we should talk very clearly about the fact that I was the one that was putting in the money and the time. She was only coming in with time. And the conversation obviously never happened as to exactly how the partnership was supposed to be structured, right? It was almost like a pre-written rule. Everybody knew, like, Jimmy's kind of the main guy. She's kind of secondary. I know he's the one that kind of opened it and kind of brought her along, and so forth and so on. And here we go along. We open up the company, and lo and behold, we start cracking it, right? I'm pounding pavement every day. I'm in my car. I'm doing all the sales. I'm bringing in new customers. And in a matter of less than a year, we go from complete startup out of a kitchen table to almost $500,000 in revenue in probably like 6 months, 7 months, something like that. So we got to like $500,000 in like half a year. And again, no employees, so you can only imagine what the net profit was. We were making really good money. And then we grow that in the next 2 or 3 years from $500,000 to all the way up to 6 million, 7 million, 8 million. You know what I mean? We get into some really high numbers. Without completely boring you to death, in the process of growing the business, I start to notice that there are debits happening within the company, right? There's money being taken out all of a sudden for warehouse, warehouse reimbursements or things that needed to be done to the warehouse, and they gradually start increasing, right? It starts at a couple hundred, and before you know it, it's 500, then 1,000. The line items, obviously, in our closing statement. So all of a sudden, we go from like 500, 250, 300, $400, and all of a sudden, we start having months of like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 a month on this debit card for cash. Not even like purchases at, like I say, like a Home Depot or a Lowe's. But I start seeing, I should say, along with my controller, we start seeing money being taken out from the debit as actual cash, and it starts approaching the $3,000, the $4,000, the $5,000 range. Anyways, without going too deep, I think you can know what happened here. So, bottom line is that group that person was kind of a husband and wife. They started to take money out of the account in cash. Long story short, it blows up. Everything goes sideways. A lot of other things happen at that same time, and that's a video for another day, because it is also an unbelievably crazy story and another foobar of mine and another fumble of mine that I had to find a way to get out of, and another life lesson that I certainly want to share. But everything went obviously south at that point. Because I didn't have an operating agreement, because I didn't do my job as a CEO and as an owner, because I didn't structure a deal the way it was supposed to be structured, because I didn't put it on paper, because I didn't follow basic fundamentals of operating a company, right? Because I didn't start with the end in mind, right? Like, I know in the beginning, when the company first forms, you never think ever. I'm telling you, I've opened multiple companies. I have multiple $1 million companies now. And even now to this day, I open a company, and even now, I'll be honest with you, and maybe because I came from nothing, so every penny that I earn is so humbling for me, right? So, but even now when I open up a company, I always think to myself, and I never even think to myself like, man, that company's going to do, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million. Yet I have multiple companies that are doing that and north of that, obviously, annually. So, but you never think that way. So it's so easy for you to cheat the system, right? It's so easy for you to cheat the process, right, of being an entrepreneur and being a responsible owner, putting an operating agreement together, putting a contract together, right, putting a JV together, or whatever it is you're going to do. It's so easy for you to cheat that, because in the beginning, there's nothing to split. You're not doing any business. You're not collecting any revenue. There's no income. But I am telling you right now, you should automatically do those things, because the end in mind is where you should start. You should automatically treat that company as a company that's going to do 5, 10, 15, 20 million later on in the future. Because as soon as you understand that you have the ability to do that and could possibly get to that number, you will treat the beginning completely different. So where was my mistake? Simple. Number one, we talked about it. We verbally had an agreement to some degree. But I'll be honest with you guys, we went to court and I lost. Why is that? Because verbal doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. By the time we got down to the end of it, it got to a point where there was no way for me to prove what we all knew to be fact, by the way. Everybody knew that the initial investment was mine. Everybody knew that I kind of ran the ship. Everybody knew that. None of that mattered. And because I didn't do my due diligence, and because I failed as a CEO, as a leader, and as an entrepreneur and a business owner, and because I didn't do the fundamental basics of putting together a very clean operating agreement and then take that operating agreement and have a sit down with my partner and say, hey, here's what it is, and just talk out. Even if we would have had a disagreement at that time of what the split of the company would have been, at least we would have had a conversation about it. We would have talked about it, negotiated it then, put it on paper, got everything signed, so that by the time something like that happened, I would have some sort of legal recourse to stand on, where I can then go to court or go to bat and say, hey, this doesn't have to get messy, because if you do a good operating agreement, I'm gonna be honest, for the most part, most of these things won't be as messy, because the operating agreement should very clearly define what will happen when some of these things happen, what the split is gonna be, what the buyout's gonna look like, what the shared splits is gonna look like. Most operating agreements, if they're done well, are going to have those things on there. So by the time that whole thing went down, everything went south. I had zero operating agreement. I had nothing but verbal things. I had nothing but, and at that time, text messages obviously weren't as prominent as they are now. So you had a couple text messages back and forth, but none of those, not a single thing of those things held in court at all. And at the end of the day, it cost me $1.2 million in a supposed buyout for a company that, I'll be honest, probably wasn't worth that. But at that point, I had no other option than to eat that number, try to buy them out, and try to move on with my company, because at that point, my company was I'm not going to say it was flatlining, but when you go through that type of change, it has a very negative impact, like a massive negative impact. So that $1.2 million set me back probably about 4 or 5 years, because that's how long it took me to try and pay back what I needed to pay back in order to make that happen. Anyways, so what exactly is the story of today and the lesson of the day? Always start with the end in mind. Always understand. It doesn't matter how peachy keen, it doesn't matter how happy and how friendly you guys are in the beginning, and guys can be best friends, and he's dating my sister, and you can have all of that going on. When it comes to business, it is 100% your due diligence and your responsibility as a good owner, an entrepreneur, and a leader for you to make sure that you absolutely put everything on paper that needs to be on paper, so that if anything were to ever happen and anything were to ever go down and anything negative would ever occur, that you are not having to guess or try to defend yourself on the things that you guys had talked about in the beginning was going to be the exit plan or what the split was going to be. You can go right back to the operating agreement. You can revert to that and say, here's what we talked about. It's on paper. Oh, but we talked about the... Here's what we talked about. It's on paper. Make sure it's solidified. Make sure it's 100% legal, top notch. Get your attorney involved. And that is the way you avoid $1.2 million mistakes. And that is the way that you avoid getting pushed back 5 years. 5 years it took me for me to recuperate. I would be way farther along today than I am. Although I'm doing well, I would be way farther along today than I was if I hadn't have made that mistakes. And it was my ego and my, I know, that really got me into that mistake. And that's something that I should have never allowed. So anyways, that is the lesson of today. Hopefully that's something that you needed to hear. If you're a young entrepreneur, starting entrepreneur, if you're starting your own business, hopefully this is something that's going to add some value to your day. And hopefully my $1.2 million mistake, hopefully that won't be your mistake. And hopefully I've been able to say something that flip a switch and caused you to get these things done before you enter into those types of partnerships. Anyways, with that being said, may you have a very blessed day. Really appreciate you guys. See ya.